The van rocked once, hard enough to shove the suspension down and make the cabinets whisper against their latches. In 2012, on a narrow two-track inside Michigan's Hiawatha National Forest, not far from Seney, I lay still on a thin mattress and watched a moving light slide across my windshield. Someone had walked up without a vehicle, without a footstep I could place, and now stood close enough to touch the glass. I'd come out there to sleep cheap and get an early start on a service call. I ended up boxed in by a tree that hadn't been there an hour earlier, with both rear tires ruined on the same stretch of road. I'd tried to back out anyway and only made it worse, the tires folding and grinding until the van sank into soft sand like it wanted to stay. Earlier that afternoon, I'd stopped for gas and heard about people who went missing around the forest roads. Then I'd found a vehicle tucked off a spur, door open like its driver stepped out for one quick thing and never came back. In the dark inside my van, I kept replaying that open door, the way it felt like a sentence cut off mid-word. The moving light on my windshield paused, then dropped out of sight, like the person had crouched. A hand brushed the passenger handle, not yanking, just testing. I held a tool against my chest and tried to make my breathing smaller, like I could take up less space and become less interesting. I didn't know yet that help would arrive late and that someone else would die in the dark for coming out there. Let me walk you through what happened that day, from the first bad detail to the last one. My name is Eldred, and this happened to me back in 2012 near Seney, Michigan. I drove a white cargo van for work, but it wasn't a delivery van. I fixed commercial refrigeration, the kind that keeps bait shops and diners from losing everything in a warm week. I kept parts in labeled bins, a small tank of refrigerant chained down with a padlock, and a fold-out cot behind a curtain so I could grab sleep between calls. That week, a lodge north of Seney had called my boss twice. Their walk-in cooler kept cycling wrong, and they were tired of dumping food and apologizing to guests. They wanted someone there before the weekend, and my schedule was the least awful. I left Marquette after lunch with a paper map on the seat and a GPS that liked to act confident right before it got dumb. I planned to finish the job, then drive home. I also planned to avoid paying for a motel because I'd gotten used to making my own rules on the road, and most weeks, I got away with it. At 3:10 p.m., I pulled into a small gas station just off the highway. The place smelled like hot asphalt, fryer grease, and coffee that had cooked too long. A fan in the corner pushed warm air around like it was trying. A woman behind the counter looked at my van and then at me. She didn't smile the way people do when they're trying to be friendly for tips. She looked the way you look at an incoming storm when you already have wet shoes. "You working up by the refuge?" she asked. "Lodge north of town," I said. "Walk-in cooler." She nodded like she already knew the answer, like my van had told her before I did. "You sleeping in that thing too?" she asked. "Probably," I said. "Just one night." She didn't laugh. She didn't do the polite thing where you pretend it's quirky. "Don't," she said. I waited, because people don't say that for no reason. She leaned on the counter and kept her voice low, like the store had ears and the walls repeated things. 3 people this summer," she said. "Gone. Not lost. Gone." She didn't say it like a rumor. She said it like a number you don't want to memorize, but you have to. "Hunters?" I asked, because that's the easiest box to put it in. "One was a hunter," she said. "One was just camping. One was a guy with a van like yours." I felt a mild irritation first, the kind you get when someone tries to steer your choices with a story. Then I saw the framed photo behind her, a young man in a ball cap, standing in front of what looked like the same counter. The glass had a hairline crack running across his smile, and the photo had been wiped clean so often the edges looked tired. "He from here?" I asked. She shook her head. "Drove in," she said. "His people came looking. They left crying." A man at the coffee station cleared his throat and walked out without buying anything. He didn't look at either of us. He moved like he didn't want to be part of a conversation that followed him into the parking lot. I paid for my gas and tried to end it clean, like it was a normal warning in a place full of normal people. "I'll stay at the lodge," I said. "Do that," she said. "And if you don't, park where there are other people." "What's your name?" I asked, because I suddenly wanted to make her real and not just a voice. "June," she said. "Eldred," I said. Her eyes narrowed a little, not in suspicion, more like she filed it away. like names mattered. "Cell service gets thin," June said. "If you need help, you might not get it." I tapped the counter with 2 fingers, the way I do when I'm trying to tell myself I'm still in control, and I left. I drove north with the windows cracked because the van smelled like oil and old cardboard, and the warm air made it worse. The light changed fast under the trees, the highway sun turning into a green shade that made everything look the same distance away. For long stretches, I saw nothing but pines, sand, and the occasional mailbox set back from the road like it wanted privacy. I kept telling myself this was Michigan, not some empty place at the edge of a map. There were roads, there were cabins, there were people fishing and hunting and arguing about politics at bars. Still, I watched the shoulders for parked vehicles, and every time I saw one, my hands tightened on the wheel. At 4:25 p.m., I turned off onto a forest road my map suggested as a shortcut. It was wide at first, packed dirt with puddles that looked shallow and weren't. A sign warned about soft shoulders and seasonal closures, the kind of sign nobody reads until they need it. A half-mile in, I saw fresh tire ruts cut into the soft spots. Somebody had been in there recently with a heavy vehicle, and the mud still looked wet where the tracks had pressed it down. I told myself it was a logging truck or a county rig. In places like that, somebody is usually a job and not a problem. Then I saw something else. A minivan sat 20 yards off the road, angled behind brush like it had been pushed there. One of its sliding doors hung open, and the metal reflected a thin strip of sun like a signal. I passed it, then slowed, then stopped. I told myself to keep driving. I still put the van in park and got out. The air felt cooler under the trees, but it was the humid kind of cool that sticks to your skin. Mosquitoes drifted near my ears, slow and patient, like they had nowhere else to be. The woods smelled like damp moss and something metallic, the way standing water sometimes does. I walked up and stayed on the passenger side, like that mattered. The minivan's interior looked stripped. Seats were gone. Plastic panels were pulled off. Wiring hung exposed like someone had worked fast and didn't care what they broke. A child's booster seat lay on its side in the back, out of place in all that empty space. The strap was twisted the way it gets when a kid kicks it. That detail made my stomach tighten because it didn't fit with a theft or a breakdown. It looked like a life interrupted. On the driver's floor, I saw a disposable camera. That hit me harder than the stripped panels and ripped wiring. It didn't belong with torn plastic and exposed cables. It felt personal, like someone set it down for a moment and planned to pick it up again. It made the scene feel recent, like the owner had been there with hands and breath. I didn't touch anything. I didn't lean in. I didn't call out. I just listened. No voices, no engine, no birds right near me either. Just a distant sound that could have been wind or could have been nothing. I backed away the way you back away from a dog you don't know, slow enough not to trigger it. I got in my van and drove on. I told myself I'd mention it to the lodge. I told myself they'd call it in. I told myself I did my part by not getting involved, because in my line of work, getting involved is how you end up losing a day to paperwork and questions. At 5:30 p.m., I reached the lodge. It sat back from the road, not fancy, not run down, the kind of place with fishing photos on the walls and a front desk that smelled like lemon cleaner. A bell sat on the counter like it had been there since before anybody had cell phones. I worked until after 7 p.m. The cooler had a failing contactor and a thermostat that read wrong under load. It was simple once I got into it, the kind of fix that looks impressive to anyone who hasn't stared into an electrical box for a living. I pulled the panel, checked the draw, watched the cycle, and replaced what needed replacing. I wrote my notes as I went because I'd learned the hard way that your brain forgets details the minute you close a cover. The owner, a man named Carl, hovered like he wanted to learn refrigeration by staring. He asked questions, and I answered with half my attention because I was also listening to the building, the way places sound when you're alone in them. Old timbers settle, ice machines cycle, doors close in the wind. Most of it is harmless, but your body still tracks it. When I finished, Carl paid me and offered a room. "Got one open," he said. "Cheap." I thought of June at the gas station. I thought of the open minivan door. I thought of my own habit of cutting corners until a corner cut me back. "I'm fine," I said. "I'll just park out back for a few hours." Carl frowned. You sure? He asked. We had a guy last year who did that. Woke up with his catalytic converter gone. He said it like a joke, but his eyes didn't match it. I'll be okay, I said, and I hated myself a little for saying it. Carl pointed toward the back lot. Lock it up, he said, and don't go wandering. At 7:45 p.m., I parked behind the maintenance shed where a yard light made a pale circle on gravel. 2 other vehicles sat there, both dark, both still. The lodge itself looked calm from that angle, windows lit, curtains drawn like everyone inside agreed to pretend the world outside didn't exist. I ate a sandwich, drank warm water from a bottle, and checked my phone. No service, not one bar, not even the fake kind. I turned on airplane mode, turned it off, restarted, and got the same nothing. I sat on the edge of my cot and stared at the curtain like it might tell me what to do. Sleeping behind the lodge felt safer than the woods. It also felt stupid, like I was letting a stranger's warning control my decisions. Pride is a quiet thing, but it's heavy. At 8:20 p.m., headlights swept across the lot and stopped. A pickup rolled in slow and parked a few spaces away. The engine idled longer than it needed to. A man got out and walked toward my van. I watched through a gap in the curtain. He didn't stumble. He didn't look lost. He moved like he belonged there, like the lot was his, and the vehicles were just objects he managed. He had a cap pulled low and a posture that said he wasn't in a hurry because nobody could make him hurry. He stopped at my driver door and knocked once, firm, like he was a supervisor. I slid the side door open a few inches and kept the chain engaged. The air outside smelled like dust and pine sap, and the light from the lodge barely reached his boots. Yeah? I said. He angled his face toward the opening. Evening, he said. Name's Rhett. He held up a dark wallet-sized thing, then put it away before I could really see it. I check permits and camping, he said. We've had thefts. You can't sleep back here. Carl hadn't said that. Carl owned the place. That mismatch landed in my chest like a weight. I'm on the property, I said. Carl said it's fine. Rhett's mouth tightened for a moment. I'll talk to Carl, he said. But I'm telling you now, don't stay in that van tonight. His tone didn't match his words. He didn't sound concerned. He sounded annoyed, like my presence messed up his routine. I looked past him at his pickup. I saw a low trailer hitch and mud on the tires like he'd been on forest roads, not just pavement. The bed was covered, but I could see tie-down straps through a gap and something metallic that could have been a toolbox. Why? I asked. He shrugged. People do stupid things, he said. Then they blame everybody else. He stepped closer. Not aggressive, just closer than he needed to be. I could smell cigarette smoke on him, the cold, stale kind that sticks to fabric. Where are you headed in the morning? He asked. Back south, I said. Which road? He asked. That question hit wrong. It was too specific. It wasn't, you know the way out, friendly. It was route planning. I'll figure it out, I said. Rhett held my gaze, and for a second his eyes looked flat, like he wasn't reading me so much as measuring what kind of trouble I could become. Do yourself a favor, he said. Park in town, or leave. Then he turned and walked away. I watched him get back in his pickup and drive out without going inside the lodge. No greeting to Carl, no nod to anyone. Just in, out, done. I stayed still for a full minute after his taillights vanished, listening for anything else, for a second vehicle, for laughter, for proof I'd overreacted. The lot stayed quiet. Then I got out of my van and went to the front desk. Carl looked up from paperwork, pen in hand. Do you have a guy named Rhett who checks permits? I asked. Carl blinked. No, he said. Why? I explained, fast and clean, the way you do when you don't want to sound dramatic. I watched Carl's face change as I talked. His jaw shifted like he bit down on something. He didn't come in? Carl asked. No, I said. Carl grabbed his keys. Stay here, he said. He walked outside. I followed anyway, because staying alone inside felt worse. Carl moved like a man who'd seen petty crime before and didn't want tonight to be the night it turned into something else. He went straight to the back lot, scanned the gravel, and crouched near my rear tire. He lifted something with 2 fingers. A short screw, sharp, the kind sold in neat little boxes. It had fresh gravel dust on it, and the point looked like it hadn't hit much metal yet. That meant it hadn't been there long. Carl stood up and looked toward the driveway. "Get in," he said. I did. Carl leaned into my side door. "You're not sleeping out here," he said. "You're going to the motel in Seney, or you're sleeping on my couch." I looked past him at the tree line beyond the lot. The darkness under the branches looked solid, like a wall someone could stand behind without ever being seen. "I saw a stripped minivan on a forest road," I said. "Door open, booster seat inside." Carl stared at me. "Which road?" he asked. I told him. His eyes went flat. "That's where they found the boots," he said. "Boots?" I asked. "From the hunter," he said. "Just the boots. No man." He took a breath, and I could see him trying to keep his voice steady for both of us. "I'm calling the county," Carl said. We went back inside. He called. He got voicemail. He called again. He told the machine who he was, where he was, and what was happening, and he did it with a clipped tone that said he'd like the machine to feel guilty. After the second try, he set the phone down harder than necessary. "It's a small department," he said. "Night shift is thin." Carl looked at me like he was making a decision he didn't want to make. "I'll drive you to the motel," he said. I shook my head. "If you leave the lodge short-handed," I said. "And my van is still out there. If he's messing with it, he'll know it's unattended." Carl stared through the window toward the back lot, and I could tell he didn't like any of the options. "Fine," he said. "You're sleeping inside." He locked the front door and pulled the blinds down. Then he turned off a few lights, not all, just enough to make the place look closed without turning it into a cave. I sat in a chair by the window until 9:30 p.m. My nerves stayed high in a steady way, like a motor that wouldn't shut off. Carl moved around behind the desk, checking doors, checking the back hallway, doing small tasks that gave him something to control. At 9:48 p.m., headlights swept into the lot again. Carl stood beside me. We both watched. The pickup rolled in and stopped near my van. Rhett got out like he'd come back to finish a job. He walked to my driver door and tried the handle. It didn't open. He stood there like he expected it to, like he'd already decided how this night ended, and my locked door was only a minor inconvenience. Then he went to the rear, bent down, and looked under the van. Carl's voice stayed low. "He's after the converter," he said. Rhett slid farther under the van than I expected. He moved like he'd done it 100 times, like he knew exactly where to put his shoulder and where to place a hand without scraping. The gravel shifted under him in small, controlled sounds. Carl reached under the counter and pulled out a baseball bat. He handed it to me without looking away from the window. My hands tightened around it. It felt heavier than it should have, because now it meant something. Rhett rolled back out. He sat up and looked around the lot slow, like he felt watched. Then he stood and walked to the lodge door. He knocked once. Carl didn't move. Rhett knocked again, harder. Carl's eyes stayed on the door like he could burn a hole through it. I thought about June. I thought about missing people. I thought about the stripped minivan and the disposable camera left behind like a breadcrumb. Rhett stepped off the porch and walked toward his pickup. For 2 seconds, I felt relief. Then he walked past the pickup and into the dark behind the maintenance shed. Carl swallowed. "That's not good," he said. We waited. 10 seconds, 20. The lot stayed quiet, and that quiet felt deliberate. Then the yard light behind the shed went out. Not flickering, not dimming. It just went dead, like someone had cut power on purpose. Carl went still. His mouth tightened, and he made a sound under his breath that wasn't a word. He grabbed his phone and called again. This time, someone answered, and Carl's voice changed from worried to sharp, like he needed the person on the other end to understand the difference between problem and danger. "This is Carl at the lodge," he said. "I need a deputy out here now." He listened, then spoke again, tighter. "A man is trying to steal from vehicles and he cut my light," Carl said. "I have a customer here. I'm not going outside." He listened again. He gave our location, slow and clear, like he knew panic makes you slur details. Then he hung up. "They're sending Hank," he said. I didn't ask who Hank was. In a place like that, you don't have many choices, so you accept the ones you get. I kept my eyes on the back lot. I watched my van like it was a person I cared about. I watched the dark behind the shed and tried to see through it, which is a stupid thing the mind does when it wants control. At 10:22 p.m., a patrol vehicle turned in. The headlights painted the gravel, the shed, the trees. The world snapped into clearer shapes. A deputy got out, big shoulders, smooth movements. He walked with purpose, not fear, like he'd been called to plenty of nonsense before and didn't want tonight to be the night it turned serious. "Hank," Carl said under his breath, and the way he said it carried relief and worry at the same time. Hank went straight to my van, crouched near the rear, and looked at the ground. He swept his flashlight beam along the gravel, then the underside of the van, then back to the tree line. He didn't talk much. He did what professionals do when they're working, which is observe first and speak later. Carl opened the door and stepped onto the porch, staying under the spill of light from inside. "Hank," Carl called, not yelling. Hank turned his head slightly. Carl pointed toward the dark behind the shed. "He went back there," Carl said. "The guy who showed up earlier, not a deputy. Name was Rhett." Hank nodded once and kept walking. He moved around the shed, flashlight out, his other hand near his belt. He disappeared into the dark like it was just another corner of a room. I waited for him to come back out. Instead, I saw a brief orange blink in the dark, low to the ground, right where Hank had gone. It looked like a spark, like a tool making contact. I heard a sharp crack that didn't sound like a car backfiring and didn't sound like a branch snapping. Then Hank stumbled into view like his legs forgot their job. He fell forward onto the gravel and didn't move. Carl froze on the porch. For a second, my brain went empty, like it refused to accept what my eyes showed it. Then Rhett stepped out behind the shed, holding something long and dark in both hands. Not a rifle, not a bat, more like a tool, the kind you'd keep in a truck. He didn't run. He walked, calm, straight toward the lodge. Carl backed inside and slammed the door. I moved with him. My grip on the bat went white. Rhett hit the door with his shoulder once, testing it. The frame held. He stepped back and looked through the glass. Our eyes met for the first time. He smiled like we were sharing a private joke. Then he turned and walked back toward my van. Carl's voice shook, just slightly. "He knows we're in here," he said. "He came for my van," I said. "He came for you now," Carl said. Rhett opened the driver door of his pickup and pulled out a tool bag. He set it on the ground by my van like he planned to stay a while. Then he reached into his pocket and took out a key. My stomach tightened. He put the key into my driver door and turned it. The lock gave. The driver door opened. I stared at it, unable to understand, because I knew my keys were in my pocket and my spare was in a locked drawer back at my shop. Carl whispered one word that sounded like a prayer and a curse at the same time. "How?" I didn't answer, because I didn't have one. Rhett climbed into my van. The interior light came on, bright through the windshield. I could see his shoulders moving as he searched. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't rushing. He looked like a man flipping through a file he expected to find. I suddenly remembered the disposable camera on the minivan floor. I pictured it sitting there, out of place, like it mattered. I wondered if Rhett collected things, souvenirs, proof, or if he just liked knowing who belonged to what, like he was building a private map of strangers. Rhett stepped back out of my van holding my work clipboard. Heat rose in my face. That clipboard held invoices with my company name, our phone numbers, customer addresses, job notes. It was a map of my life and a schedule of where I'd be, written in my own handwriting. Rhett looked at the clipboard, then looked toward the lodge. He raised it, not high, just enough to show us he had it. Then he set it on the hood of my van like he was leaving a message. He walked back toward the lodge door. Carl raised his voice, steady and loud, the way you do when you want the person outside to know you're not prey. "Deputy is down," Carl said. "More are coming." Rhett stopped. He tilted his head like he was listening to something far away. Then he smiled again, and it wasn't friendly. It was satisfied. He stepped off the porch and drifted into the darkness between the lodge and the road, not running, not hiding, just moving like he had time. I watched the space where he disappeared and expected him to circle back. I expected footsteps on the porch, a window rattle, the sound of a door being tested, Instead, I got nothing. And nothing is what makes your imagination work overtime. Carl grabbed my arm. "We go out the back," he said. "There's a deputy down," I said, because part of me still wanted the world to follow rules. "I know," Carl said. "And if we step outside the wrong way, there'll be two." He pulled me through a back hallway and into a storage room that smelled like paper towels and old detergent. A small window faced the woods. Beyond the glass, the forest was a thick black mass with no depth. Carl shoved a shelf aside and revealed a narrow door. "Old staff exit," he said. He cracked it open and looked out, then closed it again fast, like the air itself was dangerous. "Run to your van," he whispered. "Get it started, drive through the front, and don't stop." "My tires," I said. Carl's eyes flicked toward the back lot, and I could see him doing quick math. "Front ones are fine," he said. "You can drive on rims if you have to." That last part wasn't advice. It was desperation dressed as a plan. Carl handed me the bat again, then opened the door. We stepped out. Cold air hit my face, damp and heavy. The gravel under my shoes sounded too loud. Every step felt like an announcement. I sprinted across the lot toward my van, keeping my head down. Carl moved to my left, bat in his hands now, a man defending his own place because nobody else could yet. I reached the driver door and yanked it open. The keys were still in my pocket. The ignition still turned. The engine started on the first crank, loud in the quiet, the kind of sound that feels like a flare shot into the sky. Headlights hit the shed, the trees, and Hank's body on the gravel. I swallowed hard and forced myself to look forward. Carl shouted one word that cut clean through everything. "Go!" A shape moved near the tree line, fast and low, cutting toward the front of the van. Rhett. He came in at an angle that would put him at my door in 2 steps. He didn't hesitate. He didn't wave. He moved like he'd done this before and knew exactly how close he could get. I jammed the van into drive and hit the gas. The van lurched forward. Gravel sprayed. The rear end shuddered as the damaged tires grabbed and slipped. Rhett reached the driver door as the van moved. His hand hit the frame. He grabbed for the handle. I didn't swerve. I didn't brake. I drove straight toward the front of the lodge, toward the paved entrance, toward anything that wasn't darkness. Rhett ran alongside for 3 strides, holding on. His face stayed calm, like he still believed he owned the moment, and my panic was just noise. Then his grip slipped. He dropped away and rolled onto the gravel. I kept going. The van bounced hard as I hit the paved drive. The rear end fought, the bad tires slapping and grinding. The steering wheel vibrated like it wanted to shake out of my hands. I focused on the road and refused to look back. I made it to the highway. I drove to the motel in Seney and pulled into the lot too fast, tires squealing on pavement like I'd forgotten how parking worked. People came out of rooms in socks and t-shirts. Someone shouted a question I didn't answer. Someone else held up a phone and called 911, and the sound of that call felt like the first normal thing in hours. I sat behind the wheel shaking, my hands still gripping nothing. When a patrol vehicle arrived, a trooper pulled me out of the van and sat me on the curb like I was a kid who'd fallen off a bike. He asked my name. I gave it. He asked what happened. I told him, fast and plain, because if I slowed down, I might not start again. They went back with enough people to fill the lodge lot with flashing lights. Before dawn, a state investigator sat across from me in a small office that smelled like paper and stale air. She didn't waste words. She asked questions the way you do when you've seen too many nights like this, and you don't need drama, you need facts. "Did he take anything from your van?" she asked. I thought of the clipboard on the hood. "Yes," I said. "He got my paperwork." She nodded once, then slid a clear plastic bag across the table. Inside was a ring of keys. Some were old and worn, some looked newer. One key stood out because it was clean and fresh cut, and it had a small piece of tape wrapped near the top like a label. The investigator spoke carefully, like she didn't want to give my brain anything extra to chew on. "That key opens your van," she said. I stared at it until my eyes watered. I'd never met Rhett before that night. I'd never given him my key. I'd never left my van unattended in a place where someone could quietly copy anything. Yet, he carried a key made for my door, cut clean, tagged like it belonged in a set. I looked up at her and tried to find a sensible explanation that didn't exist. She held my eyes and didn't offer one. Outside the window, the sky was turning gray over the trees, and even that light didn't feel like safety. It just felt like another shift starting, another day pretending the woods were only woods. And all I could think about over and over was that open minivan door in the forest and the disposable camera on the floor like someone had meant to document a normal trip. Because now I couldn't stop wondering what was on that camera and whether Rhett had already seen it.